research. So like I said, the fundamental skills that are required to do good research in Africa is still very challenging. And it's not because the people are not intelligent. To the contrary, it's the other way around. A lot of people doing good research in the developed part of the world are people from African origin or developing country origin. What normally happens is the availability of resources and training capabilities is what makes the difference between a researcher overseas and a researcher in home country, Africa, or developing country. So when I bring this kind of concept, the first thing is, it's not like the people back home don't know what, they're not intelligent enough, but unfortunately they are disadvantaged with the training they have. The way the system is taught, the way the approach is done, there is not a lot of potential to identify good researchable topics and to even do good research in the first place. So what I'm just going to do is in this presentation, I'll take you through how to sort of establish what is researchable and what is not. So thinking about conceptualizing research problem and determining a good research contribution. Now, a lot of things in research is tied to contribution. And that's a very loaded word. When we talk about contribution, we're talking about several things. It's like, in most cases, it's definable. In most cases, it's in the eyes of the beholder. It's like beauty. One person sees an art and says, oh, this is the best art I've seen in my life. Another person sees it and says, what the hell is this? Who can ever do? Who made this thing? They need to be fired. It's a function of how people see what they see. But from an academic point of view, because we run what we call a peer review process, the quality of every work is based on the judgment of your peers. So other people will have to sit and look at it and say, okay, it makes sense. And in that way, by the evidence from one or two people, we can tell whether a product is good or bad, or a research product is good or bad. In case we're forgetting to do something, I don't know, I've not seen Winston in the room. Can you reach to him?
I just put a call across him. He's not picking up.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Let's continue. The lucky thing is we can always go back to this video. So let's see how we sort of build on the things we have been learning and see how we create a researchable topic, or think about ideating or ideas development, conceptualizing a research idea. First of all, where do you think research ideas come from? Any thought? Comfort, Ruth, in your just general thinking, where do you think a good research idea would like to, how do you think the process of getting research idea works? Just by your own natural thinking. You don't have, there's no wrong or right answer. It's just how you perceive it, how you think about it.
Well,
So areas.
I'll say that, okay. No, okay. I will say, okay. For me, one way it could be from areas where you have passion for, areas of interest, things that, everyday ideas, everyday things that happen that you have an interest for. Like let me just speak on a general note. Like I know that, for example, my husband talks about sports all the time. So he talks about why this thing is not doing well, why the other one is not doing well. So if he was asked to come up with maybe a spontaneous research topic, I know that's one area he will most likely bring his idea from. Now, coming to academic research work, it's not like that, where you have the liberty to go to maybe a particular area of interest. So, but then I believe that in the whole profession, there must be an area of interest really to you. So your area of interest could help you come up with a research topic or research idea. And also, when you read about other people's research, when you read about other people's work, because since I started the program, so I've come across one or two research work that some other people have done. So oh, this is how it is. So then I take it back. How can I apply what they have here? So to my own particular area of interest. You know, after speaking, for example, the day that we had the first lecture, after speaking, after that lecture, I said, oh, I learned that the one thing I picked from the class for me was that someone, a research idea could come up with a comparative study of when something was there and when it was not there. You know, it could be it could help form a research topic. It's something to research about. So yes, from everyday things we come across every day, you pick an area of interest, then you see what has been done on that particular area before. It could help you come up with something.
Absolutely. I'll come back to that point. Let me hear from you, Ruth.
Okay, getting research ideas could come from an existing problem. Maybe you feel this thing is not the way it should be, or this is a problem, this is an issue. So you want to embark on a research to find possible solution. And another thing that that generates some research idea I see is trends. Sometimes you just see a new concept that springs up and it's okay, let me know more about this. Maybe it's not been applied in this area. Let me see the prospects. You know, I want to know if this thing that has been adopted here, what advantages or what are the prospects it holds in this environment, looking at the peculiarity of this environment. So for me, I think trends, when I see new ideas, when I see trends, or what do I call it? Yeah, I think I'll just call it trends. When I see trends coming up, I want to know, okay, what's the impact, what's the prospects for for this environment, or for me, or things like that.
Thank you, both of you. You've established the parameter, but I'll elevate the conversation. And now this is the key things I want you to be drawing up. All you've said is correct. But however, if you remain in that domain, you will still be playing in the game of the ordinary. You want to go above the ordinary. Why? In the end, and I'm going to talk about it shortly as I come to contribution. In the end, interest and motivation is great. What other people have done may be interesting, but you also have to think about what will excite a readership. What will be so important that somebody will pay attention to it? And sometimes I think about conceptualizing research idea like many things that have to do with like good music. You may not like the artist, but when you hear a good song, you say, you know, well, this one trash, but I don't like this guy. But you can't take it away. But you may think, oh, this is, if you're so passionate about a song and you write it and only you and your friends listen to it, is that a great song?
No.
Exactly. The same way, if you're if you're a tailor, if you're a fashion designer, you say, oh, I've made this fantastic design of, you know, skirt and blouse, and everybody you show, you just say, Auntie Taylor, make you wear this one, eh? Now you will go fit, you know, go fit us. That's a signal that there is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You say, hey, sister, come, this is my style. If you use them, go down your next party. Everybody say, until you wear them, it go fit you past. What you've just signaled there is really the lack of value. And so what I'll take us through is that ability to understand the balancing thing. You know, you've got to keep all those things in the mix. I am interested in this, but more importantly, what part of this thing do I think will give somebody a reason to have a second thought? That's one thing. Then you have to think about impact. You've got to ask yourself, genuinely, who really cares about this matter? And how will the solution really solve a problem? One of the things I used to challenge my colleagues, not in this part of the world, but back home in Nigeria and all those places, I say, if you read your own research, would you take your own recommendations? Did you hear me? If you yourself read your own research, if you have a business and you read your own research and you see your findings, would you do the recommendations you gave yourself? And they start thinking, say, we just do this thing. Sometimes you have to write this paper and say, that is the problem. And that's why nobody really would even pay attention to you. I tell academics, if we go to events, you know how people will say, I am Mr. B. You introduce yourself by anything, but in the academic world, we introduce ourselves by our writing and our intellect and our philosophy and our contribution to the discipline. And that's why we're going to be talking about contribution. So if I wanted to introduce myself, it's not important. Say, my name is Olanka Moses, search me, I've done this. If I just say my name is Olanka Moses, put me on Google or Google search, and that's the best way to introduce me. What you see, my contribution in the discipline, my field, and the things that you are recognized for, the research that policy documents have been quoted out of your research. That's the time you begin to know that you've done a work that somebody is saying, well, okay, a bank wants to change their infrastructural situation or their governance policy. And they say, hey, we've just seen this article that was written by Comfort, Ruth, and Yinka. What they were saying there, we think is going to apply to us, so we're going to use it. The first way you prove that you have started building that impact, you're bringing yourself closer to your discipline, your profession, is evident in the people who've used the finding, not because you have found, a super, you may not be another Albert Einstein, you may not be another Socrates, Plato, or anything, but you could, in your own way, also further the course of understanding something. And that thing in academic world is called contribution. Contribution is a bit of a very complex terminology, but yet very simple. Because when you say contribution, and sometimes when you write an article and reviewers are coming back to you to say your contribution is not clear, you're beginning to say, what are you saying? But I said, this is what I want to do. It's my research. Yeah, but it's your research. But they're saying in our community of academics, we also want to see what you're doing differently from all the things we already know. For instance, if you say you want to bring a cure to malaria, you're not going to say you're the first person curing malaria. You want to just show us what is it you're bringing to the malaria collection of different medicine that cure malaria, that this one is much better. If I ask you, you will have like 5 or different tablets you could recommend for malaria. True or false?
Yeah, true.
So if somebody said they want to bring another cure to malaria, you want to say, okay, what will your new cure do differently than the other ones we have? Then the person will say, wait a minute. I know some people who used to take chloroquine and they will react badly. So I'm going to give you something that doesn't bring a reaction, but I'll still give you the cure. You say, well, that sounds good. But what about side effects? So don't worry, I'll take care of it. And so you begin to see the incremental value they bring. And you want to see that contribution practically, tangibly, and then you're going to ask yourself, is this research worth doing? That's how you conceptualize the idea. Some ideas are great, and so we nurture them. Some ideas are useless, we discard them. Some ideas are interesting, but they are not feasible. And that's another thing we'll come to filter. So conceptualizing and transforming ideas into thoughtful and carefully designed research is complex intellectual process that hinges on a critical factor, contribution. And if you want to take one word away today, is contribution. What is it this research will do differently from what other people have done? Sometimes we could take a comparative study that is great. Where there is none, it makes sense. Where the people are not interested in the comparison, if you show them a comparative study, they will still not be impressed. And this is a quote by Evans 3, et al. 2015. I'll put the article at the reference in the end. Before we begin, one important thing in advancing academic knowledge is research. In fact, it's the vehicle of success and failure in the academic world. Beyond that, having myself seen my works quoted by, reputable, the Brookings Institute in the US, see some of my work enter the World Health Organization database on COVID response. It gives you an evidence that in the end, if you don't write what somebody can read and drop value and say this is important and we can think about it, then there's a problem. So the vehicle through which we advance the progression of our career, the progression of the discipline, is through research. And it doesn't, sometimes it's not how big or how small, but it's how much you're moving the progression. Somebody may have done one thing, but didn't have the time to complete the other. You can complete that part and you move the discipline further. And we'll talk about sort of the incremental growth of contribution and how you can advance. There's, landmark, we call something seminal work that will completely bring a shift to what we know. And we talk about incremental progress in just advancing knowledge over time. For instance, it's a landmark achievement for the first person who discovered the telephone, isn't it? But since then, every other person who just increased one thing or the other, who moved it from, a button screen to touch screen, from black and white, those were just incremental advancement. But the biggest landmark thing would have been the invention of it in the first place. So you got to think about contribution at different levels. Complete reestablishment of something that is unknown, non-existent, and then the incremental growth in improving what we already know. At the level you are, you've got to be when I tell people, you need to know your strengths and weaknesses. You do not have, it's not very easy for you to say you can achieve a landmark contribution now, but you can start by saying you want to make an incremental growth. The people who make some of this landmark contribution have devoted themselves to nothing but the research, day and night. And sometimes I relate these issues to the things you're familiar with. I'll tell you what, a lot of you, and you will have mentioned this in some of our conversation, may be familiar, maybe more religious in some ways and more committed to your church and more attendant to your activities. But I'd like to ask you this question. Have you ever noticed the difference between two preachers before? Like in the way they preach? Have you ever noticed maybe you may probably like your pastor because they do one thing better than the other pastor. It could be their own contribution to the spirit. But more importantly, the point I want to bring it is this point of intellect. You could give two pastors the same text, but one will do a deeper research on the text, a deeper theological dive, a deeper reflection of that text to contemporary world matter, tying it to all more complex and understandable scenario, and yet intellectually rigorous, not just verbal storytelling, hyping, but you're going to see the intellect, and you're going to see one pastor that spends time really reading, understanding, really doing the study, and another one that just picks this text from nowhere and just says anything to get past the 30 minutes of his preaching time. Have you noticed anything like that before?
Yes.
Good. It means even in this world of the things that very basically reflect just difference between, it could be the same text, but the way the pastors push it, it's different value they bring than another person. And that's the thing with ideation. It also builds on how much depth of knowledge people have. But the question before us here is, how do we make a research problem, or how do we identify a research problem that, one, has value, two, is important, and three, makes a significant difference to our previous knowledge? As an examiner of several pieces, one easy question I ask most of the PhD students I go to examine is, tell me one thing you know now you didn't know before you started the PhD. It's easy to kind of review all the literature, and I'll talk about literature review in our next week class. But more importantly, what in the literature have you synthesized and brought out as a way you can make your difference? So how can we conceptualize and execute research ideas that make a difference is what we're going to gain here. And let me see how far I can go. It's a topic I can spend the whole day, but I'm conscious of your time. So I'll push it as quickly as I can. So there was that point. What did you say? Was somebody saying something?
No, you can go ahead.
No.
I said contribution, I've mentioned this, a simple yet complex issue. Why? Eve, who's this Professor Eve Jedon? So he is a editor-in-chief of Critical Perspective in Accounting, which is a very solid accounting journal. And he was writing in 2013, and he said the concept of research contribution means different things to different people. And I've just talked about the fact that you go into an art store, what they call their best art never impress you. But somebody will buy the art for $1 million. And you're going to say, what are they buying? It's because beauty, they say, is in the eyes of the beholder. You know? But reality is, a good product also is a good product. How do we know a good product? We confirm it from the majority of people who use it. It's the same thing with a good research. In the community of scholars who will review it or who will give verdict, they will tell this is good finding or this is very good contribution. The same way, a musician could sing a song and say their song is the best in the world, but it's not in your own place to say you've sang the best song. It takes the people who listen to the song to say your song is good. So writing is the core of academic scholarship, and each written manuscript, at the minimum, aims at offering incremental insight to something. You don't want to just write something that nobody reads. Keep that in mind. And I know at some point you may just want to get done, get a degree, get the process done, but you never know. A lot of people too have made landmark changes or improvement to academic discipline just by the research work they did at their undergraduate or honors or master's level. But in the end, writing is not for the purpose of writing, it's to communicate new knowledge or new insights. And the value of every written work, its ability to tell you something new or teach the reader something new they didn't know before reading it. Let me say this. How would you have felt if all the articles we reviewed last lecture, you learned nothing about it? You didn't see any value in it. How would you have felt?
Mm-hmm.
How would you have felt?
As though we just wasted time.
Exactly. Waste of time, disappointed. And Winston, I can hear you. What did you say?
I said disappointed. I would feel disappointed of wasting 1 or 2 hours and not understanding or getting any ideas from what I'm looking at.
Exactly. That's the word I was looking for, disappointed. It's the same thing. I'm not a movie person, but if, out of pressure or for one reason, somebody say, let's watch a movie. Over the Christmas break, my son and I had a challenge. We're supposed to watch one Christmas movie every day from 1st of December to 25th of December. So, but sometimes I get too busy and I come back and he's going to say, oh, Daddy, we've not watched today's movie. I say, oh boy, you don't know what I've seen today, but let's sit down and watch it. And sometimes because it's a promise, it's like something we've agreed. That's how we want to sort of prepare into Christmas. So we agreed to watch one Christmas movie a day. It was a commitment I had to keep to. Even when I was tired, I need to go to bed, I still have to go and keep an hour or two. But that's not the story. The key story is sometimes after those 2 hours, I just say, oh my God, this is sacrifice for my boy, but that was a waste of my time. Because I just know I've just put 2 hours, I will have read an article to something I will have not, that didn't add value to me. And that's the way it is with articles. That's the way it is with research. Sometimes we say some things are not worth the paper they are published on. Some papers, even the cost of the paper that was used to publish the article is more expensive than the ideas in it. So it's a waste of time and money. So nobody would read it. And if people read it, they'll be very disappointed. So the impact of our insights and our thoughts are very crucial. Even though it's a subjective matter, sometimes it's a matter of degree. Sometimes people will say, well, you make a contribution, but to what extent? It's not big enough for me to value it. Or maybe you need to push it further. it's a choice, but at least let's start off with something that says you have made a contribution. And while it is subjective, and to the extent that people judge it in terms of the degree, the shape, the attitude, the belief, the emotions, or even the knowledge or the sentiments that is within it, you still have to show to some extent. And the onus is on you to prove your contribution. While you prove it, people need to now validate it. You need to say, this is what this will do differently. And then people will confirm it, it is true. So how is contribution determined? It's an area of tension, especially when you look at what really defines as contribution. Sometimes what matters to one person doesn't matter. For me, I may be keen to know about something that I am aware of. For instance, I may be keen to know about a practice that I know of in New Zealand, but I would like to see how it operates in, say, Liberia. So I would like to see another study of that nature in Liberia, or a comparative study between Liberia and New Zealand. But to somebody, for them, they may feel, oh, it's no value. It's a replication, or it's a copy. You know, there are different levels of contribution. It's just like in manufacturing and production. In Nigeria those days, there's this concept they used to call Aba made, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the meaning of, when we say Aba made, what's the perception there?
It's made in
Made in
Aba
Aba.
or produced in Aba.
Yeah, but that's the whole language, isn't it? But we use it as a philosophical expression of what? Lower quality?
Lower quality or
Yes,
inferior
yes.
products.
God bless you. Lower quality, inferior quality, and a copy type. It's not authentic. But over time, sometimes you may have Aba-made research. Unfortunately, there's nothing like that, but maybe we can just create that place for this purpose for convenience. But no disrespect, Aba is a very strong place that I think we didn't utilize the talent there, or we should have utilized it. Interestingly, my mom is from Abia State, so you never know.
Wow.
Wow.
So in the end, these are my uncles and brothers, and I feel they've done a lot in sort of trying to move the industrial base. But for some reason, we have this disrespect for, you know, small beginning. But I'll come back to that on another conversation. The point I'm making is, even in research, people have this perception of what we call a low quality research, or a, you know, sort of near fake or cheap research, just copying somebody else to just do one thing and you say you've done your own. Maybe acceptable in some level, in some places, nobody wants to read that. So I normally would have launched this as a poll, but for time's sake, I'll just put it on the screen and give me your answer. So what determines contribution now from all this story? Number one, what you think the journal editors want to publish, what you want to write about, interest, an idea that solves a practical business or societal problem, or all of them?
C.
C. Okay, one person takes C. What does another person take? Who else? Give me your thoughts.
Can I change my answer?
You can change, oh, it's allowed.
D.
D.
All
Okay,
of
you want to
this.
go for D, all of this. Anybody else? Comfort, what do you go for? That's comfort, sorry. Ruth,
D.
you go for D. Wisdom. What's your choice?
C.
Okay. And perhaps I will also pick D, even though it's subjective. But if you think about it, if in the end, I don't want my paper to sit in my house and I'll show my kids, that means I want a journal editor to be happy to publish it.
Yeah.
And think about it. If you write the paper, what do you want it for? It's not supposed to be hanging in my room as a decoration. I want it out there for people to read. And the people who determine what is published will be the editors. So I need to start off with something the editors find valuable. So it has to be a combination of these things. And that's the question we started with. You know, you can see some of your answers play out here. You are interested in something. Good example there, you were talking to us about comfort. You like sports, or your husband likes sports, and they would like to see some answers come through empirically, but it's more than just that. It's a question of, really, do the people in the sports industry really want that empirical answer? Who is going to read it? Who is your audience? Why is this even important to the audience? What is the real practical value your audience will draw from this research? So that's something to keep. Those are some key points to keep in mind. And the editors are the first line of test. The editors will read it and say, sorry, we don't think this is important to us. So they give you what we call a rejection straight off. Take it away, or go rethink it. It could be what you want to write about. That is great. So you need to know how what you want to write about aligns with what the editors will be interested in publishing, and also solves a practical problem in society. If you can fuse a problem, if you can come up with a research idea that ticks all of this, you are in good shape. And what is the appropriate threshold of contribution? Very hard to tell. There's a special skill you get to, and the skill comes from really knowing the domain. Like, if you don't know enough in that domain, you can't really give insight. You have to have studied deep. And it's the same thing. I'll still come back to that, my practical example. The pastors or the people who have been in the business of maybe doing one thing for 10, 20 years diligently, keep in mind, diligently. When they look at something, they can tell where the value is. And if you see an expert, you can understand they know it. It takes skill to identify it. Let me ask you this. How many of you know gold if you just see it from visual? You just see gold. Would you identify gold if you see jewelry? Can you tell if this is good gold or
No.
not? Just by looking
At all.
No.
In fact, for me, I'm the person that if I ever buy things like that, I'll be scammed, because I don't even know anything that is shining to me must be gold.
Exactly.
But somebody will see it and say, this is fake. Don't even touch it. Don't go there. But to me, I will have paid money and walked away. And that's the same thing with contribution. The skill to know a good one actually comes from a deep understanding of the space. So don't do the mistake most people I know do. They want to do a research on a subject, they read only 2 or 3 articles. You don't have enough knowledge in that space to begin to say you know where, as we call it, gap exists. Even that language gap is a bit funny, but let's even use it for convenience sake. You can't read 2, 3, or even 10 or 20 articles before you can establish to say, now you know where the problem is, so this is what you want to solve. It's far more than that. It takes a bit of deepening. Study to show thyself up, approved. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Study to show thyself what? Approved.
Approved.
A
1
workman.
Timothy chapter 2, verse 15.
There's a reason why it is there. And in all thy getting, what should you get?
Get knowledge.
Get knowledge. There's a reason. If you ever want to learn philosophy and you want to start by reading the Bible, just read Proverbs first. It's based on a lot of philosophical thinking that also it may crystallize in natural domain, but it may not. But in today's world, you can still see truth, evidence from all of this. But the point I'm building, and I'll relate this to you because a lot of you will have that you would have stumbled on those things, but you may have read them and had meaning out of it. But you don't even see how they play beyond your immediate, maybe religious or spiritual life, but they also mean a lot beyond that. It means if you don't study to show yourself approved, you do not have the competence to tell somebody else this is better than what they have done, which most times is what people do in research. Somebody will try to show what others didn't do well, that they want to do better, but you think you have that skill set or that competence to do that when you have not even you don't even know this literature. You don't even know the depth of knowledge of things that have been written in that space. And now to the practical problem people in Africa and developing countries suffer? First, they do not have the access to even access the right materials to make them even know the place, know the space. So the data, the journals, the access to very current, intellectually rigorous journal may be something that is too expensive for some universities to pay for. And so just because they can't subscribe to those journal base, their students and staff do not even have access to read it, let alone even know the knowledge within it. So it's a bit of a disproportional problem already that has nothing to do with the intellect of the people, but a lot to do with access. So here are some questions to help in that respect if you really wanted to determine what could be a contribution. So one thing is you may want to say, well, have you persuasively argued the uniqueness or the value of your idea within the current literature? And that's the first place I was really, don't like the word gaslighting or touching you up. So, okay, tell me, if you don't even know the conversation, how do you know you are providing a better truth or a better information? It means there is the need to continue to deep into study. So one way to solve it is if you now know something you're interested in, begin to read as much as you can in that space. Everything you see that you know, you can learn something from in that space, read it. So say if you're beginning to be interested in sustainability or the extractive industry research, begin to read papers on it, read articles on it. If you can't access the articles, email the authors. Sometimes people like me are available. Say, I need to know more about this. Do I have access to this material? If I have it, I'll pass it on to you. Why? You can't speak on a subject you are not knowledgeable about. Does that make any sense?
Yes, sir.
And that is the first big problem of really understanding it. Number two, what practical business or societal problem will your idea solve? Or who's going to benefit? This is where I challenge a couple of people who would write something out, say, this is not a good work. You have to think about it. They said, no, just find a way to publish it. In the journals where I'm editor to, and I sit on a couple of them, I turn down a lot of works. And sometimes people who send it may feel you're brutal, but it's because the readership of those journals cannot find any of those things valuable. And sometimes I'll just joke and tell the authors that, well, if you really think this is strong empirical work, do you think you will take your own advice? Do you think your findings, if you have a business, all the things you've suggested there, would you like to do them? Then you find this behavior of, oh, it's just an empirical exercise. No, remember, if people read and take every single recommendation that you have made in your paper and they go and act on it, then there will be crisis. Do you know what I mean? Because some recommendations are truly not worth it. So the next thing is that in the eyes of other scholars, which we call the experts, what difference are you bringing? What is the thing that you call new in your idea? And always remember, you guys will do accounting research. How will this sort of make a difference in the accounting domain? So there's a lot of things that has to come together to be able to balance out this thing. But don't be too pressured because you're just starting the game. It will come naturally. And I'm pleased that a lot of you still find that track of academic research a good thing. Some of us, the things we're talking about now, where it's just a product of maybe 20 years in the game. And at different stages, under different teachers, under different experience, before it starts yielding. You don't have to put 20 years to get to that point, but it takes time. It takes time. It takes time. I tell people something, I say, there are disciplines where sometimes your experience is not how long you've been in it. It's actually a measure of how productive you've been. Common thing here, people make a mistake of, if you're a pilot and you've been a pilot for 20 or 30 years, it doesn't matter. Your real experience is in the number of hours you've been flying. Does that make any sense?
Yes, sir.
So 20 years of a pilot's career that you have only flown 10 hours means you have 10 hours experience for 20 years of being in the game. It could be similar to somebody who is only 10 years in the game or 5 years in the game, but they've got 200 hours flying time. If you juxtapose it, the experience, the competence is in the practical application of the skill than just clocking the time. So you have to also think whether what you're talking about makes a coherent argument that is able to establish the problem you can see based on literature. And you need to convincingly demonstrate that your new idea can address the problem. So there are two ways we talk about, we can get some practice. And even if we don't finish this today, when we come on Tuesday or next week, we can tie up some of these things. When you establish what you call your research gap, or when you establish where you think there could be a problem, you need to also think about how can you fix it. Which is why I talk about the fact that you don't need to always create the problem and leave it for somebody to fix. A good researcher would think about also how they fix the problem. Sometimes you can't fix all the problem, but you start off with some ideas. But we'll look at the different way contribution manifests. There are like 3 key ways, or let's even look at 2 big ones. First one is evolutionary approach. And this is the very typical one you find. This is where you advance the extant knowledge. You just say, oh, X and Y did this, Z and X did that, and I am building on where they stopped. You're pushing the conversation. You're extending the debate. And, the idea here is that the epistemic script of evolution helps to serve as a growth to discipline. We sort of say we constantly push our knowledge base. We need new knowledge to add to the old knowledge. So it's a contribution. You just keep growing gradually. You need something more than what we knew before. And that's fine, it's acceptable. We'll talk about the differentiation approach to contribution. Now, in the differentiation approach to contribution, as an author, you'll be arguing that your work is separate from others because this person, for instance, used a method you think is faulty, so you have come to shift it. You're changing the method because whatever they tested with that method is not valid if the premise of the test already is wrong. So you're proposing something new, you're shifting the norm. Or you may even argue that the whole finding has been erroneous because it's all premised on a philosophically wrong base, or you now can think about the problem differently. So you can think about a contribution that manifests itself in sort of a differentiation based on how the current finding departs from existing knowledge. People may have written that to have more women on the board will help improve organizational productivity or success or profitability or something. And you can build on that, but that will be evolutionary. But if you completely find a departure to that thinking, then that's a differentiation. For example, such contributions could manifest in how the previous data was interpreted or was used. It could also determine the sort of methods that were tested or applied in the research that you thought was faulty. And I talk about the bricolage approach. Now, the bricolage is the mix and match. It's like the building block. It's the decoupling and coupling of both theory and method. So what people do here is somebody says, well, Comfort used, say, a qualitative method to solve the same problem. Winston used a quantitative method. Why not I'll come with a method that would use both? So I will not really be saying, I think I would be arguing that what Winston did was not enough because he only used one method. What Comfort did was not enough because they only used one method. I think I'm providing more knowledge to the game by using the two methods in one text. And that's fine. if you can argue for the value that brings to the body of literature, that itself gives you a space for contribution. And that's how you think about your idea. So you can say, oh, they've done this research in X and Y country, but let me see if I infuse more together, take more methods, take more methodology, use the jurisdictional difference, use a different theory, and explain the same concept. Maybe all the papers I've been reading, I've only thought of this from the agency theory perspective. What if the agency theory is not sufficient to explain what we know about this phenomenon? Maybe I better try a bit of stakeholder theory or something else and blend it if they ever can work together. And see how it goes. Are we still in the room?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are.
And that's the way you kind of start melting down that idea of this is what my contribution will be. I've got a couple of further considerations. If you have to start building strong ideation or how to establish your good contribution, then you need to also think about establishing very important research questions. And research questions are things you need to put clearly. It's like in conversation, some people are talking to you from the start of the conversation to the end. You really don't know what exactly they're trying to say because you want to get the question. What is the real objective? What is the research question? What is that key thing, precise question we want to answer? So be clear in your mind and in your manuscript concerning one, the meaning of the key terms in your research question. What exactly? If you say ESG, make sure it is what it is that we know it as. If you have used it from a different perspective, then give us a definition that fits your own premise or context. If you talk about sustainability, which also is a very loaded terminology, but we practically know what it is. The ISSB has just recently put out a revised definition for sustainability. But if you conceptualize it slightly different, you also owe the readers that right of knowing your new conceptualization and why. So you've got to scope your question too. You've got to be in such a way that really people would see it within the premise of what the research is trying to do. Another thing that is, a bigger conversation we're going to talk about is also thinking carefully whether your research is really establishing a causal relation or an association. And that's something that is very strong methodologically speaking. Now, there's a difference between causality and association. If I say to you that there are more deaths during December month on the road through accidents, but I'm running some data and I just say, oh, actually, it's the month itself that causes the death. But in principle, is that a real cause? Is the month itself the cause of the death or just slightly associated with the death because that is perhaps the period more people are traveling?
It's not the month itself is not the actual cause.
Exactly. So that's why somebody will say, oh, Ember month has come, or that's the dying month. So you just think the month itself brings death. No, but it's a month where there's a hype in activity. People travel, more people are on the road. And just by the fact that more people are on the road, more drivers are likely to be fatigued and tired, and they will miss the track and they will get into ditches, and more accident will be happening because that's the time you've got. So people will do some research and use what in principle is a mere association and establish the premise that it's a cause. It's not. And that itself can be very offensive to academic scholars who understand the difference between causality and association, because how you premise it and how you put it to them is a basis to accept or reject the work. And these are things that you don't want to get into research without really understanding what they mean. The fundamental understanding of these things is important for you to even know how you can craft your idea. So it's a collection of things that really will help you understand what is researchable and what is a good question, as we say, or a good contribution. So you can synthesize the contribution in several ways. You can think about it by some questions and say, so what does this study add to our understanding in accounting that we didn't know? You can also establish how the study is new and interesting. Remember the word interesting. It should be new. I want to go watch a new movie in a theater or something, but the movie should also be interesting. It shouldn't just be new. It should be interesting. I want to see favorite actors I may like, but I just don't want them to be there doing nonsense. I want them to still be there doing something I'll draw value from. It's the same thing with research. So you got to think about how it adds to new knowledge based on what people know before in the literature. So we always talk about situating the study within the appropriate literature as a way of showing its contribution. The topic itself is also important and interesting. There is a lot about the title of anything, just put a bad title and nobody would even read it. The study is differentiated from the extant prior literature. That's not extant, it should be extant, and we can just correct that there. All right, so it's typically the case that once we can tick all those boxes, we can at least begin to see there is some element of value in the research. If you can tick all these boxes, and I want you to constantly go back to this and kind of think, every time you're thinking about what you need to research about, just think about how some of these things are very much visible within the topic. Identify the important implication in terms of the actions or belief that will change based on the study. People who will believe your study and act upon it, what will change about them? And that's the one value you can add to yourself and to your readership. So how to conceptualize research idea? There are so many ways. Number one is environment, scanning, and current events. And you both of you mentioned this when you were talking about how you think about research problem. The more you look around you, you will see problems. But think also about the kind of problems that will be of exciting value to people around you. Some research questions, sometimes I see research students who will tell me, I've looked at the literature, nobody's doing this, and nobody has ever done it, so I want to do it. I say, well, true, but first of all, be careful. There's a reason why maybe you may not be the first person who will have seen this. It's probably because it's a stupid idea. That's why nobody decided to do it. Just because it's never been done doesn't mean it's a good idea. Does that make any sense?
Yes, sir.
So keep that in mind. Now, at your level, you may not be able to be doing collaborations for now. You want to do research first that helps you just get through your dissertation or your thesis work, but you're still collaborating with whoever would be your supervisor in the project. So really spending time to learn and understand. And there are lots of resources out there that you can deepen your knowledge beyond the normal. Start off by saying you want to do something that will give you a good value for your time and intellect, not just a tick box process. Attend seminar, conference, and presentations. Some of us I'm on Twitter or LinkedIn, and every time there's any big thing coming up where I'm speaking or somebody is speaking that I know, I always share the link. That will be valuable. You need to go into those sessions, listen to it. You never know. That is where you find ideas. It's like, I'll bring back the church to both of you who I know you build a community around it. There are days you go to church and you just know that day you've heard one solid point from the preacher and this is a game changer. Doesn't mean like 365 days of attending church, there's just going to be 1 or 2, 3 moments you're really going to hit something and this is it. And you feel it, it that today there must be something different about what I've heard. Am I correct? Have you felt that way before?
Yes, sir.
And that's the same way ideas bump up. You come into a space, they're talking about something, and right away, it could be the same way we've been talking about this last 2 contacts we've had, and all of a sudden something is beginning to tell you in your heart, there must be something in an area that would be of great help to you. So it's time to start digging about it. So you want to start really understanding that space. So you need to be at presentation. Opportunities like this is important, collaborations, and you need to attend a lot of good research training and self-development and engagement programs. Can I tell you the real difference between researchers in developing countries and other parts of the world that are developed? Is just the training. Sometimes even good ideas die because they are poorly executed. So you need to know how to turn a good idea into something that is great. I tell you what, one of the most developed things in Nigeria at the moment is the Nigerian entertainment industry. The music of the artists in Nigeria are international, they're global stars, but they've been singing, and the Nigerian music has been there for many years. Did you know that? But they couldn't take it to the international stage like it has been in the last 5 or 6 or 10 years, maybe now. It's been so internationalized that it's now mainstream. Sometimes I'm passing places and they're playing, and I know the artist playing, and I'm really saying, these people don't even know who is singing the song, but they just know it. It's now mainstream. It's because over time, they now learned how to do it with the right skill and the right quality. I had a colleague once who told me they watched some old Nollywood movie and they were just laughing at the poor quality, everything. But today, these guys have, you know what I mean, right? You see all those
Yeah,
the
old
gods.
videos.
Yes, yeah, is it Evil Men and all those things. But today, the
Yeah,
quality of those guys' work are on Netflix.
Netflix, yeah.
What changed? They learned, they had the talent, but they didn't have the skill. They've gone to do the training. They've gone to do the development. They've invested in the engagement. And now they know how to bring the product to the world stage. And that's the same thing happening. Sometimes I read some people's idea and I say, oh, this is a good idea if only it's in the hand of somebody who knows how to turn it into gold. And I'm not going to run this in this session because of time. I know you have to head off for another thing, but there's a glimpse I've just put there into some of the notes editors have to give about their experience handling papers of poor research ideas. We'll just read one or two. So I've got like excerpts, and this is from a journal article publication. So this was like, I think 9 editors of leading information management journals sort of reflecting on their experience reviewing and handling papers, and this is what they had to say. Most of them said different things, but it ties down to the contribution of the paper. And here's one we can read together. To use the expert reviewer's time effectively and improve the efficiency of the reviewing process, journal submission can be DEX rejected by the editor or the associate editors without being sent out for review. There can be many reasons for DEX rejection, but most of them are rejected due to a few key concerns. Based on my experience, I would like to highlight the following main reasons for why do editors DEX reject submission. Number 1, insufficient novelty and new contribution. Your manuscript can be DEX rejected if there is very limited justification and evidence on its novelty and new contributions, especially in relation to theory and the research advancement of your discipline. If you like, you can submit a well-written manuscript that has followed a rigorous research process, but if it does not demonstrate sufficient novelty or new contributions, it may not pass the initial assessment by the editors. To avoid this problem, your manuscript should provide a critical review of the current research, identify very clearly the research gaps to be addressed, and substantiate your claim of new contributions within or with your own work. And I'll put that article there as a 2022 article. And this is actually what I've just been talking about, right? And I concur with this editor. And this is Professor Yang Kwee-Duan. He's the associate editor of International Journal of Information Management. So whether it's something you want to pass to your committee for approval, there is this thinking in all academics, but the threshold of the thinking is higher depending on where you are in life. This is again from Professor Christy M.K. Chuen, Editor-in-Chief of Internet Research. The reason for this rejecting, reason 2, lack of novelty and significance. Internet research expert manuscripts with solid theoretical foundations. However, we are also looking for research manuscripts that address important issues, advanced theories, and offer new theoretical insight. Manuscripts that simply apply a well-established theory, test it in a new context, e.g. new technologies, or in certain countries without adding new theoretical insight or highlighting its unique contribution are unlikely to be sent out for peer review. Now, here is it. For this editor, even if you take what is known in Nigeria, you go and test it in Ghana, just that alone, if that's the only basis of your contribution, is not sufficient. They still want, in the midst of that, you still need to provide more theoretical insight or highlighting the unique value that research adds. I'll give you this last one before we go further. Professor Yogesh Dwenvidi, he's the lead author of this paper, and he goes on to say he's the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Information Management. So inadequate research contribution, lack of sufficient topical and theoretical novelty, as well as limited significance and relevance of results limits the research contribution offered by a submission. Some researchers attempt to examine issues that have been well examined in the distant past, but have less relevance and significance in the current context. So they are unlikely to make any significant or interesting contribution. Some submissions may attempt to examine emerging issues by employing well-examined and tested theoretical models, but however lack theoretical novelty and are unlikely to progress to the next rejection or their screening stage. Now, these are two things in two ways. For instance, one thing is somebody talks about a completely out of touch topic. For instance, how many of you ever heard of the bank consolidation issues in Nigeria? There was one time when Soludo was CBN governor, bank consolidation was a key issue, right? Are you familiar with that? Bank consolidation was a big thing in the 2000s. Imagine somebody today telling you they're writing about bank consolidation. You'll be wondering, what am I going to learn about it? Another thing, people may talk about IFRS adoption. There is still the potential to make contribution, but it's a well-researched area that to start telling people what you want to do new about it, really, it's like going to bring them the moon. So first of all, yeah, you're right. First of all, being smart to really identify a novel space where not much has been done, but you can still make a contribution is very important. One of the things that really struck me, it used to shock me when students were doing research back then in some countries or local context, they say they can't find any material about it. So if you find the material about it, why are you going to do it? It is nobody. In the end, if you find something that somebody has done extensively about that thing, isn't that telling you that there is no value in your own work? And I see this behavior replicate in different ways. To be novel in your idea, you have to think critically out of the box. I see this also. One person puts a shop and starts selling MTN recharge card. Everybody will go and do it. If you all do the same business, you're not going to have value. One person starts, everybody repeats it. But the value, the people who become rich are the people who look for what nobody's doing and do it. You got to start innocent. You got to start making cars. That's quite expensive to do, but you have to think within your space. What is it that you have to do to add value to the system and the process rather than replicating cheaply and badly what has already been done? And that's where contribution really ties together. I would always love my discussion and reflection, but I'm not sure I have the time. But I would like to leave with asking one or two questions. Quickly, before you jump out of the room, what have you all learned, one by one, 1 minute each? Ruth, you want to go first as the leader?
Okay. In fact, this session has been quite enlightening, and it just got me thinking because recently we were informed to start searching or to start bringing topics, proposed topics for our research. The HOD requested that we come on. He has not fixed a day for us to come and see him with our proposed topics for research. And it just got me thinking that how much you emphasized on knowledge, and that's actually what got me thinking, how much knowledge do I have? How deep or what's the depth that I have dug into to acquire knowledge concerning any area I'm focusing on. So for me, knowledge is actually critical, and you made emphasis on contribution. Just like you said, our research here is focused on, or maybe let me not say our, let me personalize it. I've focused so much on, okay, what are this person done? What has this person done? And okay, let's see what we can just do around it without necessarily looking out for something new or a contribution, something outstanding, or something that will have value. It may just be going around the same circle, all over again. So for me, two things I'm taking away is knowledge, to go for knowledge, to build my knowledge base. And then secondly, to not just saying I want to do something that is of interest. I have to check, is that invaluable? Who are the people that will benefit from it? Who are the people, what's the readership base for that? What problem is it going to solve? So I have to check, is this going to contribute value to the system? So these are two things I'm actually going with.
Thank you so much. And I think you've answered the second one because you've already indicated how you will start navigating your path to conceptualization, which in my view is really studying. The question is, how much of it do you think you will need to know before you start the research? Impossible. You can never exhaust the details, but there's a point where you get to know that you have an opinion about something. You get to know that you have seen a critical mass of the evidence, and you know that to some extent there is something that you also can start talking about here. Comfort.
Ruth took out most of what I would have said also. But one thing I learned, there was a question you asked that if I was giving my research, would I use the recommendations in my own research? So one thing I've actually learned, the big broad word here is that contribution, because it's like an all-encompassing thing. Just like the questions the question we answer, all of this. So it must be something that has contribution to everybody should like derive value from it. Both you, the publisher, the work itself, the audience of your work, and they should derive value from it. So because what we do here, we just put one or two things together, just to get the degree, like we said. But can I use my research really? So that part, it's a question that I need to provide answer to, and that's what I have learned.
And thank you for that. At least taking that path through. Can I tell you one thing? And this is a secret, not like it's an open secret now. One of the things that made me, even when I was really when I was walking back and doing things where it's even unrecognized, is the fact that I said I wanted to be a distinction. Now, you see, the term distinction is not for everybody. It's for only those who distinguish themselves. It's not, don't think about it like intellectual distinction. It's the word distinction is just separate yourself, right? It could be even for good or bad, but you could distinct yourself in negative things, but not on this occasion. I'm saying if everybody is doing the same thing over and over again, only those people who set themselves apart and do something different get the extra. So it's the same thing in research. If you choose to repeat everybody's work, nobody reads you. You're going to be number 2 all the time, and you will never be an expert in anything, or you're never going to be sort of a leading light. So having that desire, which is something you've all hinted here, and I think it's a good takeaway, that how do I set myself apart different? What am I going to do different in this research that I will look back and even say, I think I've done it right. I think I did it to the best of my ability to show I can do something different. It's even that self-motivation that starts the process. Because even when you're constrained, that motivation will drive you to continue to look for positive results rather than give up cheaply. Winston, I'll take your thoughts and we'll be out of here. I think I'm past your time with 4 minutes, but after Winston, we're done.
Yes, sir.
So, what are your reflections?
Well, one thing I actually motivates me to take research seriously or to look into research is that when you said if you really want to do well, these are the things you should look at. For me, I was thinking, look, let's just get a degree, pass, go out there and do something else. But then when you said, if you really want to contribute to academics and you want to stand out, you should do these things. And secondly, when we were talking about research, I was just like not knowing what problem to solve, but just look for gap. Anywhere gap is you just take the topics and try to look for material to write. When you said to be a good researcher or to do a very good work, you must have read not 5, not 6, not 10, maybe 20, 30 articles, get more knowledge in the area, and especially the better ones. Yeah, that is why I got from that.
Exactly, and I'll leave it there. When we come to the next part, and I'll talk about this shortly, we'll end the class shortly now, we're going to fix our next class. I'll talk about literature review and how to go about identifying the papers that are reasonable. It's not just reading anything for anything's sake, but thank you also. If there is one thing I feel confident about, is at least I've got the 3 of you motivated and fired up to think about research differently and to really make a difference.
Awesome.
Like I started with it in passive, but it's a very important statement. It's this idea of show thyself or study to show thyself approved. Well, in the passage is written unto God, but in this case also unto the community of people who will be reading your work. As a what? As a workman. You're a student here. Who's a student? It's a workman. You're learning something. That you need not be ashamed, because when you're not ashamed, it means you've got confidence of your skill, your intellect, your ability. But to do that, there is a body of knowledge that gives you the confidence that I am standing on the right ground to tell you this is correct, or this is right, or this may be near the truth. It may be wrong because I'm not perfect, but I've done the due diligence to prove that this is the evidence. So, and rightly dividing, it will say the word of truth or evidence. But if you think about it, sometimes you read it for one purpose, but I've sort of reflected it in other things. And I'm sure, was it Ruth or Comfort who was giving us that passage or where it is? But read it and put it into your thinking when you're thinking about contribution and other things you do, and think about the academic perspective I've brought into it and merge the two together. I can't remember who was giving me where that passage is from. I don't know exactly where it is. Comfort. But that said, I think, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's on that point I'll close today. Any question or any last comment? I think we've talked about this already. the thoughts and reflection on some emergent ideas. We've talked about that. Although I still build more on this when we come to look at literature and what we can do with it.
Okay.
All right. So
Wow.
in the
Thank
absence
you
of,
so much, sir.
yeah, it's always a pleasure. As usual, I hope it's always helpful. So let me